I am Jim Collison and live from the Gallup campus here in Omaha, Nebraska. This is Gallup's Call to Coach, recorded on November 6th, 2015. Call to Coach is a resource for those who want to help others discover and use their strengths. We have Gallup experts and independent strengths coaches share tactics, insights, and strategies to help coaches maximize the talent of individuals, teams, and organizations around the world. If you do have questions during the webcast, we do have a live chat room that's available for you. A bunch of you are already logged into that bottom left-hand corner of the chat room. And click log in. Just create a guest account, put your name in it so we know who you are, and that will get you right in the chat room. No need to make an account. And best way to get your questions into the program. If you're listening to the recorded version or have questions about custom strengths coaching solutions for small, medium, or large organizations, of course, you can contact us directly. Just send us an email, coaching@gallup.com, or the contact form. There is a contact form right there on the live page. If you are so inclined, you can fill that out and send it in until we get right back to you. Don't forget to visit the Gallup Strengths Center. That's just gallupstrengthscenter.com for all your coaching resources and StrengthsFinder training needs. You can also catch the video in both streaming and downloadable audio for offline listening. Many of you are doing this. I was just checking the Spreaker numbers before the program, and we set another monthly record on downloads for your audio. If you haven't caught on to that yet, you can download any podcatcher on iPhone or Android. They're built in on either side now, and if you have questions about that, you can let me know. But you can recapture that time in the car, on a train, or in a plane and listen to these programs. We have about 130 of them available for you now. A great way to do it. Of course, we have the links to all that as well as everything that we have on social over at our coaches blog, coaching.gallup.com. Ed O'Boyle is our guest today. Ed is Gallup's global practice leader. He's an accomplished marketing professional and consultant who helps organizations around the world align and drive their employee and customer engagement practices. His expertise is in branding, which we're going to talk about today, purchasing patterns, and behavioral economics. It enables him to really, and with us, work with a wide variety of clients. Ed, great to have you on Call to Coach, and welcome.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
So most who listen to Call to Coach kind of are like, hey, wait a minute, Jim, you've changed up the pattern on us. Normally we've got Jeremy Petrosini here hanging out, and we're talking about coaching. But Ed, today, when we've done the Global Learning Series, and that's a series that's available just for our certified coaches, and you were a part of that learning series, and the content was so good, we wanted to break some of it out and bring it to a 30, 35-minute session on Call to Coach. And so I asked you way back when if you'd join us, and you said yes. So one, thanks for coming out. Let's get to know you a little bit, though. If you could share a little bit, because the coaches will ask eventually, share a little bit about your top 5, and then just give us a little more background on your role here at Gallup.
Sure, I'm happy to do that. So my top 5 strengths are I lead with strategic, relator, developer, individualization, and activator. Been here at Gallup for just about 10 years. Prior to joining Gallup, I did a lot of new product development work and consumer brand marketing in both financial services and in consumer packaged goods companies. In the 10 years that I've had here at Gallup, what I've been mostly responsible for has been our marketplace practice, and then recently both the workplace and the marketplace practice. And so when you think about Gallup, what we do for our clients is that we try and do 2 things. One is we try and maximize the performance of their workplace by making sure that they select the right people, develop people through their strengths, and then engage them at the work that they're doing. But the other part of that business is to make sure that you're pointing that engagement and that energy at the right thing, which is basically beating the pants off your competition by delivering on your brand promise more often, and then actually making sure that you delight your customers so that they continue to work with you, they continue to grow with you, and they recommend to others that you are the right place to go do business. And so, go ahead, Jim.
No, keep going.
No.
Let me ask you this question, Ed. So when we think about StrengthsFinder, oftentimes, especially in the coaching community, we think of it in these terms of these top 5. And during the learning series, we talked about it more in terms of performance, because it is a idea of someone understanding what their top 5 are based on performance. When you think about StrengthsFinder, and then on our practice side, you think about all these other pieces about performance. How do you recommend, as we think about our coaches, how do you recommend we tie those top 5? Because sometimes we get stuck in the naming. We say name it, claim it, and aim it, and we get stuck in the naming phase. When you think about that, how do we separate that and get that aiming going for performance reasons?
Yeah, so like many of you, my own personal strength journey started about 10 years ago, and in the naming of it is very It's interesting, but it's not really very actionable. So when I'm thinking about claiming it and then actually delivering on it, what you're really looking to do is frame it around a problem, frame it around something that person is struggling with. Personal story is about a year or two ago, the team that I was leading was having a little bit of a challenge around expectations, knowing what it was expected of them at work. How do you actually drive that forward? And I had a long conversation both about my own personal strengths, but then also the team's strengths. And the light bulb that went off was when we started to look at our team blend. We learned that they were extremely competitive as a group and really wanted to achieve things and get things done. And for whatever reason, we didn't feel like we were winning based on the results that we were having. And so, in order to realign expectations and drive some change on that, we spent the entire time talking about what winning looks like, how to win, and things like that. And so, what it did is it put actually, your strengths into a business setting and into a very practical, here's what I need to do in order to get something accomplished from the organization. Pointed at an outcome, pointed at a problem a lot of times, but a lot of times it's pointing it at something that's a little bit audacious that you have to go and figure out how to solve for. That's really where you start to get some magic coming to life. I'm starting a new group, or I'm moving into a new place, or I've got a whole group of people that are new to me. What is it that I should be doing? It really opens up the when you think about behavioral economics and status quo bias, it really opens up people when there's a disruption in the status quo to rethink their strengths, be open to learning more about how you can use your strengths, but ultimately, how does that actually manifest itself into the business outcome, the productivity that everybody's seeking, trying to achieve, and finding it more and more difficult to do in business today.
You mentioned the word audacious, and is there a secret to that, in the sense that to maybe overshoot or go farther than the organization thinks they can, as opposed to just, can you talk a little bit more? I mean, what is it about that idea of stretching it out that really pushes people?
Yeah, so when you think about exactly that, if you aim for mediocrity and you miss, what do you get, right? But if you aim for audacious and you miss, you're still going to get either very good or excellent or some sort of an outcome. So you want to reframe things as to what is the best possible solution, what's perfection look like, how do we really drive this forward, and where can you ultimately go with it? Because even if you wind up falling a little bit short of that, it's still going to be outstanding performance and outperform the competition.
One of the things we get from our coaches all the time is as they go in to maybe work with a group for the first time, and they maybe pitch this and they get pushback. And that's real common, right? It's great for us to sit here and say, oh yeah, you should pick crazy goals and go for them. And then when the team starts kicking back, what has been your experience, and what would you tell coaches when they're in that situation and they start getting this kind of kickback from the group? What kind of things can they do to push through that?
Yeah, a lot of the conversation that we have right now when we're working with our clients in this particular area is around outperforming your competition. So I've been framing a lot of the outcomes around being nervous, even a little bit worried about what your competition, your competitive set is doing, and that framing our tools around this is a way, because your competitors aren't using this, that you can actually outperform your competitors. So I frame it outside of the organization to get them thinking that this is one of those secret sauce kind of tools that if they can really amplify it and really bring it to life, what they'll be able to do is then have a competitive advantage that is not really matched by your competition, because there's no way that they can match your personal strengths if you're bringing them and your team's bringing them to bear every single day. How does somebody actually match that? So that's where I elevate it. I get it outside of the organization and really make people passionate about, okay, there's somebody out there that we're trying to beat. And for me, it's been a little bit enlightening because we work with nonprofits, we work with some charitable organizations, we work with healthcare organizations, and sometimes I'm a little sheepish around, well, I know that your competition isn't, they're like, no, there's a choice, somebody has a choice to donate money to A versus B, we want them to donate to us and not them. So it's fun because it gets everybody thinking about, okay, what's our real purpose is to be here, is to deliver excellence and to outperform the market in terms of what's going on. And we take care of more people, we sell more things, whatever those things are that the company's trying to do or the organization's trying to do. Strengths is the way that you can actually amplify that.
So let's dovetail that a little bit into a lot of our coaches that are listening have their own stake in this because they're trying to do this audacious goal of starting their own business and starting to work with customers. In this idea, we hear this a lot, we see this a lot, this idea of personal brand. And when we think at the coaching level, Ed, in your experiences, we have these solopreneurs who are starting their own coaching practices. We know the personal brand's really important, but what kind of advice would you give? So a brand new coach, or maybe one that's been out there a year or two, been struggling in their practice. Let's start kind of at the basics. What would you tell them? We know it's important, but why?
Yeah. So the first thing that I would say is that everyone has a brand promise. Whether or not that brand promise is exactly what you want it to be, and whether or not it's as aspirational or motivating as you want it to be, is part of the job to do there. But everyone has one. You've started with one in the conversations that you've had with potential clients, the way you present yourself in terms of your introductions and your follow-throughs and things like that. All of those things are the element of your brand and the brand that you're projecting inside of the organization. A lot of the conversation, and being that it's Casual Friday, it's probably not the right thing for me to be saying, is how do you show up at work? How do you show up when you're at your client's site? What do you look like? And thinking about all of those little details in terms of the way that you want to present yourself and who you want to be are really important, right? So how you dress, how you present yourself, the language that you use, the way that you follow through with people, all of those things become the elements of your brand. And brand, if you go all the way back to the beginning of why brands were created, brands were trust marks that defined why I should choose to use this product or service versus all of the other things that are out there that you can choose from. And so a lot of times what happens is people spend time thinking about their own personal brand. They get some of the elements right, but not all of them, because you have to really make sure that you're capturing everything. I always recommend that all of the things that you think you should and could be as a brand should be documented somewhere. And you should be thinking about how you perform on those things. And it's almost a mental checklist when you're going to prospect with a new client to make sure that you're going through and saying, these are the things that I want to make sure that they know about me, that they take away about me, and that they understand what makes me different. And then, sorry, Jim, I was just going to say the other part of it is you also have to understand what are the other choices out there. Right? So strengths is a specific choice, right? So choosing to go and wake up every day to first learn the language of strengths, right? Which is a little bit like a Rosetta Stone kind of a thing. Choosing to then lead your life through the way that you understand and manage your strengths. And then lastly, choosing to lead and inspire others to use their strengths in order to perform with you is a choice, right? And there are lots of other choices out there, including doing nothing, right? So, there are a lot of people who will say, it's not the right time, or I just don't need this right now, or I'm going to do, Myers-Briggs or something else that may be a little bit easier to understand because it's not quite as complicated and it doesn't have as robust a language around that. How do you overcome that? How do you convince somebody on how to get that journey started is all in the persuasiveness of you and your personal brand and the way that you deliver on that.
You'd mentioned back in the beginning about scripting it. If I was a new coach, I haven't done this kind of thing before, can you recommend any resources that folks might go to? Maybe we have some, or some stuff you used in the past, because I think there's some discipline in actually sitting down and writing or typing or whatever you have to do to figure this out, have it stated in a very clear way. Are there any resources you're aware of, or how would you recommend that?
Yeah, so there are lots of resources out there. I mean, I'm sure if anybody would put into Google and brand promise, well, if you type that in, you'll find all kinds of different ways to go about that. I use a model that Kotler uses. He's a professor out of Northwestern who has written some books on brand and how do you want to be seen? How do you want to be heard? What is the what's your image, and what do you want people to think, feel, and believe as a result of that are some of the questions that I would ask about and answer for yourself. The other piece that I would say around brand is when we talked about scripting, these things are not, they don't just sort of happen. You have to actually work at them. And whether or not in the beginning you want to script things out, if you're that kind of a person with the discipline to do it that way, whether or not you're an outline person who wants to make sure that these are the main points that we want to cover, or whether or not you are somewhere in between those two, I find that the discipline of guiding the conversation in your mind and practicing it before you actually do it is the best way to project your brand, particularly in a new environment where you're building all your credibility from zero up, as opposed to if you've already got 9 clients inside and you're talking to the 10th person who wants to perhaps come on and get coached. It's a little bit easier because you already have 9 other experiences that you've worked through. It's that very first one that really does require a little bit of specificity around that, and I would describe it as rehearsal around walking through that in your mind, actually saying it out loud, practicing it, and making sure that you're really crisp on how that comes to life.
We have an exercise that we do with StrengthsFinder that talks about having a personal board of directors. And we also have an exercise in the EP10 training materials that when you're thinking about starting a small business, goes through kind of naming people in your network and then sticking them. We have folks for accountability, and we have for these various roles that they want to go into. When you think about brand and you think about the right people to surround yourself as you're building your brand, is there a right group of people to surround yourself? Because certainly this can't take place in a vacuum, right? You got to get other people involved in what you're doing. Is there a right group, or what's your recommendation on who do you surround yourself with as you're building your brand?
Yeah, so many of the same people that we would recommend, particularly in the entrepreneurial setting, would be the same group of folks as to how you're going to project and how you deliver on the promises on your brand and how your brand promise comes to life. I think it's really a good overlap there. You may want to just have a display coach or a personal coach around what are you projecting in terms of the way that you are articulating things, the way that you're dressing, the way that you're doing some of those visual kinds of things that may not be included in the sample set of your other entrepreneurial folks. Like, how do you project your brand? What is it that you should be doing when you're on site with a client? What's the tone? Sometimes having somebody read your communications and kind of give you a critique back on, well, you're sounding, I know you want to sound authoritative, but you're really sounding instead like you're telling people everything you know and kind of over the top on that. It's good to have a third party kind of read through some of those things and give you a bit of a reality check on, oh, I thought I was being provocative when in fact you were being either sarcastic or in some way, shape, or form something different than people were really looking for.
How do you know when you've gotten your brand wrong? And we never really talk about this very much. We talk about when it's right, but how do you know? This has happened, I'm sure, to folks before. They started down the path. They thought they. How do you know? Like, I'm not on task here. This may not be the right target.
Yeah, so in my experience, I don't know if the coaches have had this, but you get pretty immediate feedback on whether or not you've got it wrong. When it's wrong, you pretty much leave the room going, okay, I just tried an experiment that I know I'm never going to do again just that way. I think you can, it's an easy read when you get it dramatically wrong. But I would define winning and losing as the way that you see whether or not your brand is actually functioning, right? If you're impressing your prospects and they're doing business with you and recommending you to others, then perhaps that's an indication that your brand is doing the right. And on the other hand, if you're not getting phone calls back, if people aren't following through with you, if you thought you had deals that are now not coming to fruition, those would be things where you might want to assess either the journey that you're going on. There's a new trend in customer world called journey mapping. Where did it fall down? Did I lose them in the beginning, or did I lose them at the very end? What am I speculating happened inside of the meetings? So the disaster ones, which by the way we've all had, you get immediate feedback on. It's like, okay, I shouldn't have done that. I tried to tell a joke at the wrong time, and that was a really bad idea. Or I've done something that's that was offensive to the audience. Okay, great. I figured out that that's the wrong one. But a lot of times your brand goes quiet, right? So when people don't get back to you, when people are not acknowledging promises that they've made to you, that's when you're starting to recognize, okay, when is that happening? What did I do just prior to that may have caused that? And then running some experiments, right? Because brands are always evolving. The core of who you are shouldn't change, but the way that you project yourself in the market and the way that you want to be represented in the market can change. We talk about a lot of times in the world of advertising and marketing, there's always new campaigns out, but really its core brand is Apple, right? And when you think about Southwest Airlines as another good example, it's a core brand, and they do some fun things or some interesting things around that, but they still are in their essence exactly who they are, even though they're making changes to both products and services that they're offering.
It's easy to say when it's not working, because you can measure that pretty quickly. So for the solopreneur, and a lot of our coaches are solo out there, their heart and soul goes into that initial brand offering. I mean, oftentimes they've laid it out. It's their thoughts. It's their baby, so to speak. And then they get the word. I see them struggle with this. They find out they didn't do it right, or they misbranded themselves. And I'm thinking, Ed, not specifically about promises and that proposition, but I'm thinking about the physical brand, that which they portray on their website, or that which they say in their marketing materials. When they get to that point, sometimes it's hard to change, right? Because they have made it that way. We have some great tools on the enterprise side of measuring that engagement back to the customer, so we can kind of get a feel like, hey, is the perception the same? When we think about a solopreneur, somebody coaching doing this, how do you recommend, besides just asking, are there other tools available? What do we have, or how would they get that feedback on their brand in a measured way as opposed to just an anecdotal way?
Yeah, so I'm going to cover a little bit of landscape on this one, Jim, because it's such a great question. The first thing I would say is that if you're thinking about your brand and the communications that you have, I would always recommend that you start by keeping it as simple as you possibly can. I think what happens a lot of times is that we get so enthusiastic about wanting to communicate everything that we know and everything that we can do that we overwhelm people with too much information, and they don't know how to digest the information and kind of go on a journey with you. So I do find, particularly with entrepreneurs getting started, that they tend to want to tell everybody everything that they could possibly ever want to know, and it feels intimidating, I guess would be the right word, that you almost don't want to get started because it's way, way, way too hard to get going. So that would be something that I would definitely say is a recommendation, that if you think things are too complicated, go find your most honest friend who doesn't have anything to do with the issue that you're in, and say, okay, look at this, look at it for less than 3 minutes and tell me what it is you think I'm trying to tell people on this. And if they can't answer the question and they're not clear about it, then that's probably a really good piece of feedback that you're getting from folks. Now, in terms of understanding how you're doing with your customers, I mean, there's very simple ways to get that kind of anecdotal information. I would suggest, not a survey tool, but just a few quick questions as to whether or not you're delivering on the promises that you made, and whether or not you're having an impact on the business that the people that you're working with are doing. And so when I think about those two things, a couple of questions come to mind. Am I always delivering on the promises that I make? Is working with me actually helping you get better at your job? Can you give me an example of a way that you use some of the advice that I gave you in a very practical way? So they're not very hard questions for somebody to answer if you're having an impact on their brand, but it also helps to frame up what your objective is. So remember, the reason that you hired me was not just to coach you about the language around strengths. The reason you hired me is because you wanted to be a better person at doing whatever it is that you're trying to accomplish in your life. So I always want to make sure that we're focusing on that outcome, so that you're giving me very specific feedback, not was I nice, did I always show up on time, was I friendly and polite to you and I give you useful information, but did that useful information actually cause you to want to do something? And when you did it actually make a change in the relationship that you were trying to manage? And would you do it again? And if you wouldn't do it again, why not? That's the dialogue that you want to start to capture. And so it's a couple of short questions, Jim, but if you do it consistently, because you don't want to go next time and then ask a whole different set of questions, because then you won't have any point-to-point kind of analysis on it. But it can be very anecdotal. It can be very open and honest. And, by the way, sometimes if you feel like the relationship is a bit strained, that's a time, and I know you guys many of you are on your own, but that's a good time to phone a friend, if you would, to say, hey, Jim, I think this relationship's not really working, and I'd like to get some honest advice. So can I connect you with someone and get some information there? One of the benefits of having a third party do that on your behalf is that you can learn an awful lot about what's working and what's not working, and you tend to get a little bit more of a frank conversation from those folks.
Yeah, one of the reasons we created all the social channels that we did when we knew we were creating this coaching community was that we'd have coaches who could talk with coaches. And so many of you do that. If you're listening to this webcast and you're not involved in those, if you head over to facebook.com/groups/call2coach, the name of this show, called TO Coach, that we've got some 4,000 and now almost 5,000 folks in that group. Many of them are coaches, and they'd love, if you want to run some of those things past them, they would love to be able to do that. Ed, let me ask you this question. Oftentimes, you talked about performance. Performance oftentimes meets financial performance. Are financial indicators, if we have a coach coming in and is pitching top 5 from a performance change, right, to change the culture, to change the individual, to get better performance out of people, are financial numbers enough for a coach when we think about a measurement of success in the organization, or are there other things that can be measured as well?
Yeah, so the short answer is yes, you want to make sure that you're linking this as closely to the financial outcomes that you're looking for. I know Jim Asplin presented during the summer some of our meta-analyses on folks who have been using their strengths to activate inside of their work. Some of the results are almost unbelievable in terms of their phenomenal nature, in terms of the way people produce. So sometimes that becomes a really compelling value proposition, but then on the other hand, it also can have the danger of being a skeptical one, right? Where it's like, there's no way that I can get there. And that's where you want to back things up to, the way I describe it is in horizons, right? So in horizon 1, what are we going to actually accomplish together? And how do we know that we're making progress on that? And in fact, how do we know when we've actually migrated through that, right? So things like making sure that you're aware of your strengths, making sure that you're actually on a weekly basis choosing to do an activity with others that you work with that talks about your strengths. Okay, that may be horizon 1. Horizon 2 may then be, and by the way, you should map this with your client. Horizon 2 would then be, okay, how am I pointing this at an important project or productivity gain that I'm trying to get? Whatever it is that you're trying to actually push that toward would be Horizon 2. And then Horizon 3 is, okay, how do I monetize this? By using this, am I actually delivering the kind of financial results that I'm looking for? It makes the pathway to believability so much easier than just saying, oh, if you focus on your strengths and you engage your coworkers, you're going to see a 3x gain in sales. okay, that feels a little pixie dust and magical, not, okay, yes, you will, but there's some hard work that you need to do here, and here's how we start by getting you aware. Here's how we start to get you to activate on this, and then you're going to start to see those results. It makes it a little bit more tangible, and it gives people sort of the, oh, okay, now I get the math, if you will, on how this actually will do it, versus just the promise that if you do X, great things are going to happen.
Judy asked a great question in the chat room, and she says, any thoughts about leveraging the Gallup brand as a coach? So advice to them on, it's our brand.
Yep.
How do they use it? What's your advice?
Okay, so here's a personal story on that. So I occasionally get asked to go speak at conferences and speak about various topics in the workplace and the marketplace. And I will tell you that the Gallup brand is the power behind those presentations, because the data that we have, the science that we've driven, the believability of that particular brand, and its richness in terms of almost everyone knows it for something, is a great way to start those kinds of conversations. So, when you mention, and this happens to me all the time, when I mention that I work for Gallup and that I'm part of the team that's doing the science and the research behind the workplace and the marketplace, people just start asking you questions. Well, what do you know about this, and what do you know about that? And so it really has three things, I think, deliver when you mention Gallup. Number one is there's a trust and credibility that we've been around for a long time. Number two is that when you say you're using a Gallup tool in order to drive change, almost everyone that I talk to believes that that tool has been rigorously tested, and we didn't just make it up 3 weeks ago and kind of run it on a Facebook blog or something like that, and then we're on our way. That they know that we spent some time in the labs actually thinking about it, worrying about all the little nuances about how it gets delivered. And then the third thing is that our reputation is that the work that we always deliver is really good. So whether or not it's powered by Gallup or strengths by Gallup, I just think part of the reason that you chose to become coaches was that you recognized that the power of the brand and the franchise is there, and I think it helps to make sure that you're delivering the premier science and the advisory services that you have are powered by Gallup research, and I personally think that that's a nice way to do that. Now it gets a little tricky, and this is where you need to figure out is how much of your brand needs to be there, and whether or not, and I'm sure everybody's familiar with Intel Inside, right? Do you do it on a small basis that says I'm powered by Gallup and CliftonStrengths Finder? That's how I kind of work, but I also bring value to this, and here are the values that I bring, because you don't want to make it seem like it's all about just the Gallup tool, because then it may not be compelling enough for your client to go, oh, okay, I see now where you fit in and how you use the Gallup tools in order to drive the change that I'm ultimately looking for.
I don't think people see how much you mentioned agonizing over our tool set, and I don't think people realize just how much work goes into the, we spend, look at EP10, and we have spent a good part of a long time working through it again, getting the data back, tweaking it, twisting it, turning it. When we think about someone's own personal journey on coaching, is there an expectation that they're going to need to kind of be constantly tweaking their message or working on that or changing it around as they go? Would that be a pretty good expectation from a coach?
Yeah, I think so. I also think that that the pace of play in different groups that you work with, right, will also dictate how you position yourself and how you want to activate change. So, just using a bank versus a retail environment versus a more technology-driven environment, just as three different examples. If you go in with exactly the same message and rhetoric, it'll work in one of those three, but it's not going to work in all three. So you have to figure out, again, coming back to core, what's the core that I want to deliver, and then how do I then customize it or tweak it in order to make it work across. And the other part of our agonizing is that we're constantly looking for best practices. So the work that we change is usually, if not always, informed by the feedback that we get. And I know that that's going to be a big part of your business as well, is that you'll notice some things are working at the more senior levels. Those are things that you want to continue to activate at senior levels. They may not work at the next level down in the organization because of their purview on change or what's happening in the company. So those are things that you'll learn over time, and you'll be able to share best practices on. But that's the other thing that I think that the community actually helps is, when I'm talking to a C-suite executive in a public company, what does it mean when I'm talking about the relationships that they're building? Well, geez, those people have relationships with all kinds of constituents, not just their employees and the people who work directly for them, but they have the Wall Street contingent that they have to worry about. They have suppliers that they have to worry about. They have other external stakeholders that they have to worry about. And so relationship building themes in that have miles of coaching angles on it, because you have to figure out, okay, who am I talking to? What messages do I want to deliver? And how do I consistently deliver those over time? That's different for a manager, right? Because a manager is taking direction from someone else above them and trying to then motivate the people who work for them in order to deliver on those things on a consistent basis. So their relationship themes are a little bit different than someone in the C-suite, as an example.
Yeah, and that's one of the traps we fall into in our social groups all the time, is where someone will come in and they'll put, I'm in this kind of situation. Do you have a prescriptive? They're looking for, what do I do? And the reason you're a coach is because you dig in that, because every situation is different based on the level of management that you're at or who you're working with, their unique top 5 or their unique set of strengths and their market. And so this is why we don't spend a lot of time giving these hardcore prescriptions from do exactly this, because it's the role of the coach to go in there and assess some of those things and then find out what's best on that from that standpoint. Matt asks a great question around pricing, and it's not what you think. So let me read the whole question to you. So he says, he's looking for the question on not what he should charge as a rate, but does Ed find that pricing can have a direct impact on clients' engagement and how serious they take the services I'm offering? For example, will a moderate to high price engagement create better engagement and commitment than one of a low price?
So at one point in my career, I worked for a company called Diageo. And that company, among the portfolio of brands that it has, is a brand called Johnny Walker, which makes this brown liquid. Some people
liquid refreshment.
Yes, exactly. Maybe some of you might enjoy over. And you may have noticed, if you're in the category, that Johnny Walker had a red, black, and then we invented this thing called Johnny Walker Blue. Right? And I'm trying to answer the question by using the anecdote of who on God's green earth would pay $200 for a bottle of scotch, that there's another brand that's sitting over there that's next to it that's $40, that's $30, that's filling that value, the different value equations. The perception of Johnny Walker Blue, and by the way, it is it's a different blend. It comes from different barrels and things like that. So there are some credible reasons that is different. But the perception of the brand Johnny Walker Blue is radically different, and the usage patterns of it are radically different because of the way it was presented to customers and the reason that you would buy it. And so, in answer to your question, yes, is very true. Some of the advice that I would give on this is first and foremost, don't give away things. And the reason that I'll give you a free call or a free this, it always worries me when people start to use loss leader free things as a projection. I have found that when we work with clients, that if you give them something, what happens is the perception of the value of what you're giving them goes rapidly down to zero, right? So, and they don't take it quite as seriously. So even if you make somebody give you a few dollars for something, they're going to take it more seriously than if they didn't give any money for it. So making sure that the challenge that you're trying to deliver against and where you want to be from a branding standpoint is consistent with your pricing standpoint is really important. And there are different perceptions at different price levels, right? So, take any category. I'm an old grocery store guy, right? So you can go through the grocery store, and at the bottom shelf is the stuff that's always the cheapest, and it does its job. It's okay stuff, but it's not going to be great. Is that the brand that you want to project? Then you move up into that mid-tier. The brands are pretty good. They have some points of difference, and they deliver on that. But then there's a pricing strategy there, and there are people who would be looking for deals and things like that. And then you go to the top shelf, and that's literally the top shelf. And then what's the perception of the brands there, and how do they differ? So there are things that you all can learn just by walking around different categories or understanding how brands go up and down, and how you want to project yourself, and what are the deltas between a low-cost brand and what do you expect to get there versus a premium brand and what you expect to get at the top of the house.
One of the questions I get all the time from the coaches is why we don't give away our codes, because that if everybody could take StrengthsFinder, then it would go viral and we'd have it. Can you talk about it in the context of what we just talked about as far as perception and why we charge for it?
Yeah, many of the same reasons that I was just describing is that there's a perceived value in knowing your top 5 and knowing your full 34. There's this a little bit of, okay, you better give me something back for it if you're going to give it to me, and people tend not to put things in the top drawer and forget about it if they paid some money for it, and they'll want to activate on it. So what part of that pricing strategy is to make sure that we're creating the kind of curiosity that sits behind that. Whether or not you as an individual want to bundle the code with a coaching service, that's fine. And whether or not, by the way, we were just having a conversation yesterday about something along these lines. The word free bothers me a lot. The word included does not. So if it's, I'll just make up a round number. Like if you said it's $100 to discover your strengths, top 5, and have X number of calls with someone coaching experiences, that means that the code is included in the $100. It's not free, right? So I worry about that kind of language, and I always worry about the projection of that. Is that people pay for the things that they get, but making sure that everything's included inside of that is a good way to create a value proposition.
No, for sure. It's certainly the number one question we hear all the time, and it's a little bit of our own dog food. When we think about the way we do our own branding and what we throw out there, I get that question all the time on Facebook, or man, if they would just give it away for free. And we try not to practice that just for those reasons. Ed, when we think about engagement,
so Jim, my answer on that one is if we gave it away for free, more people will have done the actual Strength Finder, but no more people will be doing strengths and living their lives through strengths. And that's if I were to short circuit everything I just babbled about, that's the answer to the question, is that we don't want people just to go discover them. We want them to actually use them and live their lives from them. And that's why there's a pricing strategy that sits behind it.
There's an amazing difference in my experience in the 10 years I've been working with strengths. There's an amazing difference in the attitude towards it from someone who paid even the $10 or $15, who paid themselves for it, and those that even took it as part of a company initiative, like when they took it as the company, when the company paid for it versus when they just got it for free. And so this kind of steps down. The people who paid that went after it and paid for themselves, very engaged. The engagement in the workplace just kind of depends on how seriously the company took it. If it was a one and done in the company, they probably can't remember their top 5. If they had some kind of engagement in it, they oftentimes remember 3, 4, 5 of those and can talk about it. Those that were given away for free, oftentimes like, oh yeah, I took that a few years ago and I don't even know what they are. Right. And so I challenge coaches, do that little experiment yourself when you're talking with the folks that you're working with. Ask them along those lines and just see what you get. I think don't worry about that from our standpoint, but think about it in your own coaching practice on how are you pricing, back to Matt's question, how are you pricing your engagements, and are you not adding value by making value in the price in that you're doing? I think it's a great question. There's no right answer from a dollar amount. And Matt, thank you for not making us do that, because every market is different. Ed, as we kind of wrap, as we think about kind of bringing this and we're landing, I do want to talk a little bit about, go back to this idea of engagement. And when we think about our coaches and the engaging stuff that we do, what do we have, and we talk about the Q12, is that appropriate for our coaches? We sell that on an individual seat license, and it's available out there, and they could use that. We often recommend that coaches use that before and after engagements to measure them. What are your thoughts on our Q12 tool, and what's the right way for them to integrate that in with their coaching practice?
Yeah, so I'm not sure what exactly the right way is, because I don't think there is a right way, but there are
Good
lots
answer.
of different ways that you can actually do it. One of the suggestions that I love and have is that the engagement questions, and for those of you who don't know, there's 12 items that we measure that are conditions for an outstanding workplace. And if you look at those questions, the brilliance and the magic behind them is that those questions are both a diagnostic tool, so you can actually get a number score for them and see whether or not they're working, but they're also a change management tool, so you can activate real change about it. And so, for example, the very first question that we ask is, at work, I know what's expected of me at work, right? So I can give that a numeric score as to 1 to 5, but then I can also, as a manager or a leader, talk about, okay, what are the expectations? Why are you confused? Why you're not giving that a 5? What's happening in that work environment? And whether or not there's something that you can change around there. And then one of the other questions that I think is pure gold and actually connects directly to strengths is, I get to do what I do best every day. That is an opportunity to have a conversation with someone twofold, right? What do you do best every day? And how do you make sure that you're using your strengths, or you're coaching yourself? So I would pretend that you're coaching a leader who has a fairly large group of people that work for them, 10, 20 people who directly report to them in a larger group. Understanding how they're having those conversations around the work environment, and whether or not they're delivering on expectations, whether or not they get to do what they do best every day, whether or not somebody at work seems to care about them. Which, by the way, talking about strengths and talking about how strengths come to work every day and how you're using them to accomplish the tasks, modeling that behavior all of a sudden starts to have a pretty profound effect. And there are ways that a small team could actually get their own Q12 scores and understand where they are overall from an engagement standpoint, and how they're performing on those individual 12 items, so that they can enact and activate change. So the connection is so clear and clean, because I'm having a problem with let's just say quality, getting our work done and having it be high quality and getting it done on time and of high quality. Then you start to then break down, okay, why is that happening? Well, nobody seems to understand who's doing what, and from an expectation standpoint, we have no materials to work through this. Okay, how are we then going to accomplish that task? Well, how do we accomplish that task? We accomplish that task by understanding what we all do best, what strengths we bring to the work, and how those strengths then manifest themselves into how we get things done and how we can communicate with each other. So that would be the way those two things tie together. There are some simple tools that you can use. The Q12 tool on our e-commerce environment is a place that you actually get that kind of information. And then if your clients are actually using employee engagement data, it's a good place to go and ask them for their report, dive into what's happening from those items, but not looking at the items. So a lot of the coaching I'm giving on our engagement work is not to focus on the items themselves and whether or not you have a good or a bad score. It's whether or not you're feeling that those items are in harmony with what you're trying to accomplish as a work unit. And sometimes you can have a high score on something and you're not getting the work done. The productivity is not there. That doesn't mean that you're doing well in that area. That means that you have to redirect that area and push against that.
By the way, if you're a coach and you didn't listen to what Ed just said, go back, rewind that, because oftentimes on the Q12 side it becomes all about points and all about score, and we get very mechanical about it, and it's your job as a coach is also to dig in a little bit on that and figure out why, and does it align with what the organization is trying to do and its goals. So be very, very careful when you step into this Q12. It just doesn't become, did I get a 5.0 or a 4.9 or a 4? Because those numbers in themselves don't mean anything. How does it align to the organization? Ed, as we think about...
Hey, can I just amplify that? So
yeah.
I had a work team that I was coaching this a couple of years ago now that gave perfect 5s on my coworkers are committed to quality work. Okay, perfect 5s, the whole team. They had more defects than any other team in the company. And I was like, well, why are you guys giving yourselves 5 for this when by any objective outcome, these data, you're not. And they said, well, that's because we're really great as a team, but everyone who supports us by giving us the things, they all stink. And so think about all of the conversation that gets to open up around. It's a really simple example of everybody seems to be, we're all perfect. I don't know what you're talking about. It's everybody else in the company who can't do their jobs right. And how do you reframe that conversation is a really good way to sort of, if you think about it very specifically in that way, it can really, really lead to miles of great consulting and coaching work.
Yeah, and so hit rewind if you didn't hear that. Go back, because sometimes you're listening to these in your earbuds and you're working out or whatever, and you gloss over it. I think a really important part when we think about the results you get back, and in a lot of different cases, that website, if you haven't been out to it, you should check it out, q12.gallup.com. Very easy to remember, q12.gallup.com. And you can check that out. Ed, one piece of advice as we kind of wrap this, I'll let this be anything we missed that you wanted to say to the coaches, or a piece of advice you'd give to those that are out there really trying to get after this.
So I guess the first thing I'd say is thank you. Thank you for doing this. Thank you for being on your journey either to be certified or working with us to get certified, and just getting out there and offering the kind of advice to our clients around how they can use strengths to get better, because I think that's the way that we create the movement is people produce, people succeed, people get promoted, and then others start to go, well, why is that person getting promoted? Well, they're using their strengths and they're just rocking it, and they know how to get everybody to use their own strengths, and then that's how things become viral. I think as we recap on the day, when I think about your personal brand or my own personal brand, think about the promises that you're making, the way that you want to project yourself, and where you want to be on that journey that we were talking about in terms of price. Where do you fit in that? Because your price value equation will project who you are and what services you offer. I think when you think about your existing clients and how to make sure that you're getting good feedback from them, and that you're giving them the kind of services that they need and delighting them, I think there's a lot to be said for just asking some clarifying questions. And if there's a strain in the relationship, or you're concerned about the relationship, buddying up with perhaps another coach to do a little bit of a mitten swapping of you talk to my clients and I'll talk to yours, and get some feedback on that with very simple kind of feedback, I think is really important. And then the last thing that we touched on a little bit, but I would want to amplify with you all, is that your brand and your business is predicated on the success of the people that you're coaching and what they're able to deliver. And the way that you project that is the way that you deliver on the promises that you make, provide the values that there are, and help them be better in their jobs. So always thinking about not just am I coaching and helping them understand the 34, it's am I helping them understand how these strengths actually activate into the stuff that they're trying to get done. That's when the magic really happens, because if they can see, hey, I'm better at budgeting, hey, I'm better at actually doing strategic planning, hey, I'm better at actually having tough conversations with my people about performance, I'm better as a manager or an individual because of the coaching that I'm getting, that makes you indispensable to them and someone that they're going to recommend to others to go, hey, you guys are fools if you're not talking to this person, because they really know how to help you really maximize your own personal potential. So.
Oh, very good. Ed, thanks for taking a few minutes to better part of an hour to come on. I think some really powerful stuff here. We got some feedback after the Gallup Learning Series, and the coaches said they want to hear from us more. And so we'll be changing Call to Coach a little bit in 2016 as a series. We'll be adding more Gallup to it a little bit. Dean will be joining us for more. Paul Allen, you're going to hear from more a little bit. Ed will probably try to bring you in twice a year or so to update us on what's going on from a Gallup perspective. And then we'll still interview coaches, and you'll get an opportunity to do that. But we want to continue to encourage you in that way downstream by bringing some of our experts in, like Ed, to give you some really good information. So, Ed, thanks for taking a few minutes to do it. I appreciate it.
Really my pleasure. Enjoy the weekend, everyone.
You bet. Don't hang up yet, and I'll remind everyone to take full advantage of all the resources we have available. Gallup Strength Center, just gallupstrengthcenter.com. Send us your questions or comments in an email, coaching@gallup.com. You can catch all the recorded audio and video and Facebook links and YouTube pages and all that stuff that we have for you. Even our apps, all out there. We have iPhone and Android apps for you for StrengthsFinder. It's all on our coaches blog, coaching.gallup.com. If you got an idea for a blog post and you want to get that to us, we're interviewing guest writers, so send us an email, coaching@gallup.com. Put guest blogger in the subject line, and we'll get some information out to you if you want to help us do that. We've got global meetups, so we're re-energizing, guys. I only have like 2 months of the year left to get to my 100 goal, and I'm only at 35, so you got to help me get some meetups going. So we need to get a bunch more, I think 65 more by the end of the year. I'm not going to make my goal. If you're thinking about starting one in your city, let me know. Send me an email, jim_collison@gallup.com. There's lots of meetup information in our Facebook group, and they're not that hard. You just get a place to meet, talk about StrengthsFinder, and that starts your meetup. And we'd love to have you do that in a city near you, so get in contact with me if you want to do that. And we want to say thank you for joining us today. If you enjoyed this, share it with someone. That's always how we get this out. We continue to set records every single month on our audio downloads, so we appreciate you sharing it. And with that, we'll be back in a couple more weeks with another Call to Coach, and we'll say goodbye, everybody.